Hey First City members, hope you guys are all doing well. In this video, I have an exciting announcement to make. This month, First City Church's first church planting resident is going to be joining our church and our team. Now this is going to obviously raise some questions. Church planting resident, where did this come from? Who is this guy? How did this happen? And I thought we're bringing Pastor Paul on staff, and so how are we also going to bring a church planting resident on staff as well? Well, those are all great questions. So I want to take a few minutes and tell you really how this all came to be. So back in October, during our staff and elder retreat, as Paula and I were thinking and praying about 2021, we sensed from the Lord that with the growth we were experiencing as a church and with the expectation of Paul coming on staff, that we should really take steps towards not just being a church that supports church plants, but a church that actually directly plants churches. And so coming out of that meeting, prayerfully our goal was to see a church planted in Papillion by 2023 or 2024. And really our plan for 2021 was to simply build a church planting residency on paper so that when the time came, we would have a plan to develop a guy. Well, a week after our retreat, Justin Curtis, one of the pastors at Coram Deo, reached out to me and said, hey, the elders at Coram Deo, we've been talking about church planting too and have been thinking about Papillion specifically and wanted to know if that was on our radar at all. And so I told him that about our discussion at the retreat and really our plan to build out a residency in 2021. And since it seemed the Lord had put planting in Papillion on the hearts of the elders at Coram Deo and the hearts of Paul and I, we thought, hey, we should all sit down as elders and really talk about this. And so the first week of November, Paul and I met with the elders at Coram Deo to come up with a plan for a joint Coram Deo First City Church planting residency. And during that meeting, we all agreed that First City would be the better place for a resident to largely embed, as we still have the feel and many of the dynamics of a church plant. But at the same time, Coram Deo had the resources to really fund a salary of a resident position. So while this might be a little bit of an oversimplification, a little tongue-in-cheek, we essentially decided First City would run the residency and Coram Deo would pay for it. But really coming out of that meeting, we still had the same plan. We were just going to put a residency together on paper in 2021 because we didn't really have anyone in mind or on the radar at the time. Well, fast forward another couple weeks, and Bob Thune and I are talking, and he tells me, hey, I may have a guy that could potentially be a resident, a guy by the name of Isaiah Lewis. So Isaiah and his wife Liz moved to Omaha in early 2020 for him to take the lead pastor position of a church in Omaha. Unfortunately, due to some theological disagreements with the other elders of that church, Isaiah decided to resign at the end of October. And so Bob had connected with him earlier in 2020, and so when he heard about Isaiah resigning, he reached out to see if he would be interested in church planting at all, and kind of, hey, what's your plans? Have you ever thought about planting and maybe doing a church planting residency? Well, crazy enough, Isaiah and Liz had actually been drawn to church planting in Acts 29 prior to moving to Omaha, but really the doors to connect with A29 didn't open, so they pursued this lead pastor job instead. Isaiah and Liz expressed immediate interest in the idea of church planting and church planting residency. And so over the course of the next several weeks, leading up to the end of the year and the holidays, I got to spend some time with Isaiah. Paul and I spent some time with him. Mindy and I had him and Liz over for dinner, all to really get to know them and see if it would be a good fit and if indeed the Lord was all moving us in the same direction. And look, church, while I certainly can't predict the future, and you really never know how things are going to work out, there seems to be a pretty clear green light here. Isaiah and Liz are a wonderful, godly couple who deeply love Jesus and his church. They want to see the gospel proclaimed and disciples made. There's a strong sense of relational fit and camaraderie here. And Isaiah has over a decade of full-time ministry and pastoral experience, so he's a seasoned and mature leader. They both want to be discipled in and developed in a gospel-centered church context. And so I'm really confident they're going to fit in very well at First City and will be an added blessing to our community. And so that's how we got here in a nutshell. It happened in a relatively short amount of time. And really, as I said, no one can really predict the future, and we aren't 100% sure of how things play out, but we can be confident that God is at work in this. Also, let me remind you what else happened in a relatively short amount of time. Mindy and I moving to Omaha. I met Bob Thune at an Acts 29 conference in November of 2014, and by January 2015, Mindy and I had moved to Omaha to start a church planting residency at Coram Deo. Look, sometimes the Lord brings people together in relationship and to partner in mission in a relatively short amount of time, and something beautiful happens. And so our hope and our prayer is just that As that situation turned into the planting of First City Church, Isaiah and Liz coming into the community of First City will result in another gospel-centered church being planted in our area. And so I plan to talk more about Isaiah's residency and hope to introduce you, Isaiah and Liz in person at our members meeting. In the meantime, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Look, the Lord is moving, and He's growing us and He's strengthening us as a church. And we're at this place where now we can have greater gospel impact through the planting of other churches. And so I want you to be excited and encouraged at what the Lord is doing at First City Church. I'm so grateful for you all, and I look forward to talking to you more about this at our members meeting. Have a great week.